We will start Unit 2 with graphs of other trigonometric functions. For lesson 2.1, we will be graphing secant and cosecant and tangent and cotangent. But since we have just finished graphing sine and cosine, we want to start with secant and cosecant as they are reciprocals of sine and cosine. So to graph secant and cosecant, let's start with secant. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So what we want to do is to graph the cosine function with the same properties as the secant function. In other words, we'll think of this function as like y equals 4 cosine pi over 3x minus pi over 2 plus 1. So remember, we need to identify our a. Oops. Our a is equal to, in this case, sorry about that. So a is equal to 4, b is equal to pi over 3, c is equal to pi over 2, and d is equal to positive 1. So in this case, we need to identify the period, the phase shift, as well as the maximum, what else? The minimum, the midline, okay? And then we need to identify as well the increment and the starting point. So take note that we are graphing cosine at this time. So the period for cosine is equal to 2 pi over b. So that's 2 pi over 3, or 2 pi times 3 over pi, okay, which is equal to 6. Then the phase shift is equal to c over b. So that's pi over 2 times 3 over pi, the reciprocal of b. So the pi cancels out, and the phase shift is 3 over 2. Or let's say 1.5. The maximum is d plus a. D is 1, and a is 4. So your maximum is 5. The minimum is d minus a. 1 minus 4, that's equal to negative 3. Our midline is y equals d, so that's y is equal to d, which is 1. To get the increment, we have a period divided by 4. Period is 6. 6 divided by 4, that's equal to 1.5. Now, our starting point, since we're graphing cosine, the pattern here is maximum, intercept, minimum, intercept, maximum. So your starting point would be at the phase shift, which is 1.5, and the maximum value, which is 5. Okay, so let's go ahead and graph the cosine. So first, we want to plot the midline. Midline is at y equals 1. And let us put the scale on our axis. So we can start at 1.5. So that's 1.5, and then 3. So the increment is by 1.5. So that's 4.5, 6, 7.5, 9, 10.5, 12, 13.5, 15. Okay, we can stop right here. And on the other end, we have negative 1.5. That would be fine. Maximum value is at 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's your 5. This is 1. And then the minimum is negative 3. 1, 2, 3. Negative 3 right here. Okay, so let's draw the midline. Midline is at y equals 1. Okay, we got it right there. Okay, starting point is at 1.55. So 1.55, here's our 1.5, that's 5. And then we follow the pattern. So maximum, intercept, minimum, intercept, maximum, remember this, intercept, minimum, intercept, maximum, intercept. Okay, we can stop right there. And here we have, we go the other way. Okay, so graphing this is what we got. Let me use a different color. So this is, remember, this is the graph of the cosine function. Okay. All right. And then, go down here. Okay. Now, based off on this graph of cosine, we will graph the secant function. Now, remember that, let me write it down here, secant theta is equal to 1 over cosine theta. In other words, you have asymptotes, and hopefully you remember what asymptotes are. You would have an asymptote whenever cosine theta is equal to 0 because your denominator cannot be equal to 0. And cosine theta is equal to 0 at the intercepts. Okay, cosine theta is equal to 0 at the intercept. So what we want to do here is draw the vertical asymptotes. Okay, let's try to use, okay, yellow. So we'll draw asymptotes whenever the graph crosses the midline. So here you have an asymptote. Okay, let me get that straight. Line right here. Oops, sorry. Okay, so we have this asymptote right here. And then we have another asymptote right here. So just whenever the graph crosses the midline. Okay, and I'm sorry that I'm using the same color as the midline and the asymptote. Okay, but this is where the asymptotes are. And this would be the guide when we graph our secant. So look here. Okay, your secant would look like this. Let me do the blue. So we take this minimum point, and you would have a graph going this way. Okay, take this maximum point, you would have a graph going this way. Okay, minimum point here, and a graph going this way. Okay, you see the pattern? So we graph the cosine, and then we use that graph to graph the secant. So this blue graph here, this is the graph of our secant function.